Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you're all doing well. Welcome to another DMI member meetup. We're just going to let everyone in here. People are still coming in now. Hope you guys are all doing well and having a good day. We're excited to have a panel discussion here on the future of downtown commercial real estate with the panelists. We're just letting a few more people in here. The logistics of a Zoom meeting. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Hope you're all doing well, having a good day. It is a wonderful day outside. We should have had some mass large event outside, which would have been safe for everybody, but oh well, we didn't know the forecast. Welcome everyone to, we still got some people coming in, sorry. Welcome everyone to another DMI member meetup where we try to help our members learn more about the community. We've got a great and distinguished panel again, as I said before, talking about downtown commercial real estate and its future with COVID-19 and all of the different things that are happening. We've got a great group here today. We're going to start with some questions to sort of discuss what's going on with the panel and have some good back and forth with each other. But we do want questions from you as well. If you have questions, either you can raise your hand through the Manage Participants function on the bottom of the screen, and in the far right corner, you can see you can raise your hand. Or you can send your question in through the chat function, and I can ask that as well. Or you can just let me know that you have a question. We're going to send plenty of time at the end for questions. So again, if you have a question, either use the raise hand function on the Manage Participant section in the bottom right-hand corner, or send me a chat, and I can unmute you, and we can go from there. So again, welcome to our panel. We've got three distinct and distinguished, I don't know why I said distinct. I guess they are distinct, but three distinct and distinguished panelists here today. First we have Heather Turner with Epstein Ewan Architects, EUA, who is a great practice lead, project development lead for them. A wonderful person from Milwaukee, so we've got the whole state of Wisconsin. Heather has over 20 years of experience in EAC industry and construction management, project management, and business development. Heather is a practice leader for project development and leads workplace strategy at Epstein Ewan Architects. Her passions are connecting people, developing relationships, and helping her translate her client's vision into strategy that aligns with business goals, their people, place, and technology, thereby resulting in an elevated business platform. She has a distinguished career, was a recipient of the Women in Construction of the Year citation from the Wisconsin Builders, 40 under 40 in Milwaukee, board member of Tempo, Coordinate Chicago. I mean, it just goes on and on. Bachelor's of Science, and a Bachelor's of Science in Construction Management and Architectural Engineering from MSOE. Heather, how are you today? You've got a long resume. I love it. Hope you're doing well.
Thanks, Jason. Doing great.
Good. Our next panelist is also my boss, Vice Chair of the DMI organization, who is apparently so thirsty he needs to take a beverage before he gets introduced. Nathan is a shareholder at the Reinhardt Real Estate Corporate Law Banking and Finance Practices, where he serves business and legal needs, broad range of individual and corporate and institutional clients. Nathan primarily advises real estate developers, business owners, operators, borrowers, and lenders on development projects and related financing. In addition to his real estate and general business practices, he regularly assists with both domestic and internationally based institutional investors, retained assets, private equity, and hedge funds investments. He is a former Peace Corps volunteer like me, so two of the four panelists, I guess I'm not a panelist, I can't really add anything, but two of the four people that will be talking are Peace Corps volunteers. He was in Guatemala, I was in Niger. I don't know why you need to know why I was in the Peace Corps. But he also is as I said before, the vice chair of the DMI whole organization. So he'll become the organization in a few short months. So you get to deal with me more and more. As an undergraduate degree from the University of Chicago and a JD cum laude from the University of Wisconsin Law School. Welcome, Nathan. How are you?
Great. Thank you, Jason.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Finally, last but not least, Ben Schmidt, another lawyer, MBA. He's got it all. Senior Vice President with Fiore Companies. Ben's corporate responsibilities include commercial leasing, financing, and asset management. Prior to Fiore, Ben held similar positions to other family-owned real estate companies in Madison. Ben earned his MBA in real estate from the University of Wisconsin's Grasskamp Center for Real Estate and a JD from Indiana University. That's unfortunate. And a BS in finance from the university's Kelly School of Business. Ben serves as a board member for the Goodwill of South Central Wisconsin. That's awesome. And has previously served on the Sustain Dane board. Also awesome. Active member of DMI. He and his wife, Molly, and their dog Bruiser live in Madison, although I don't know that that's correct anymore. You need to get that updated. Ben, how are you?
I'm just glad we had time for that after the first two intros.
Wow, this is going to be a fun, I like the way this panel is going because this is like my 38th Zoom meeting of the day. So I'm glad this one is a fun one. So we're going to start off with some questions about what's going on with the market, what we're seeing year over year. And then again, we want your questions at the end. So it's a question for all three panelists to begin. What impacts do you anticipate short and long term in Madison and Milwaukee downtown office market? What are the impacts happening right now to the market in both Madison and Milwaukee? Anyone can start. Nathan, we'll start with you.
All right. Impact short and long term. I think the commercial real estate industry in our downtowns, if we're not looking at retail and hospitality, which really had an immediate turnoff of the spigot right away when the pandemic started, if we're looking more at our commercial office and our multifamily, I think we're starting to see our tenants and landlords try to work through the process that retail and hospitality really had to do in a matter of days. So I think in the short term, what we're going to see is people trying to reposition not only their office space, but also their development needs. And lenders as well are trying to figure out how to underwrite the new world going forward. So I think right now it's really a transitional phase and big plans have been put on hold and people want to do kind of short-term extensions to try to figure out what's going to happen post-pandemic.
Heather?
Yeah, we're hearing a lot from our clients on more of the short-term solutions. I think a lot of companies are looking at how do we bring employees back safely, kind of in the short term, which obviously has ramifications from downtown retail to, the restaurants, that kind of thing. I think long term, it'll be interesting to see how companies bring back employees. There's a lot of chatter right now in terms of more dispersed workplace environments and, employees having more flexibility, but I kind of wonder if companies may still move towards, core business hours, let's say, which would have positive impacts for that downtown retail.
Yeah, I would echo both those points about, it just seems in the market right now, no matter if it's office, retail, or otherwise, there's just a real hesitancy to make and consider long-term commitments at the moment. Which, as it relates to downtown, is particularly interesting because it wasn't that long ago in downtown Madison that, we were faced with sort of an empty downtown, a lack of retail, the restaurants were not yet there. There's been a sustained commitment for the past 20, 25 years to focus on downtown, to make investments, and to have it really be a focal point of town. In the midst of the pandemic, and frankly, the second event in downtown Madison, in the midst of the Black Lives Matter protests, George Floyd protests, there's been, at least in the 10 years I've been in Madison, there's been the biggest questioning, I think, by a lot of people as to sort of the strength of that commitment. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us as DMI members to reinforce that commitment. And while there's going to continue to be some short-term pain, particularly on the retail and restaurant level, I would hope that our long-term commitments remain.
Well,
yeah, I would.
Oh, sorry, Heather,
I was
please.
just gonna add that I agree, and I think when we start to hear some of these conversations around potential flight to the suburbs, for instance, I kind of wonder too that some of those larger corporations, let's say on the coast, they have more like commuting issues or high-rise, long elevator waits where we don't necessarily have that here. So I kind of wonder if some of that discussion is, well, let's wait and see, explore, but a little, I don't know, I feel like it's like knee jerk a little bit of, are all these businesses going to flee potentially,
I think also in the midst of, Nathan touched on the retail and hospitality in particular. I mean, one of the things that's made downtown what it is not so much the office market in and of itself. It's been that as sort of a stabilizer plus all these other mix of uses, right? And those are restaurants and retail, but they're also, government has its offices here, but then we have Monona Terrace, we have the hotels and the conference centers, we have the university that has events downtown. Those have all been put on pause for going on 6 months now. And that's a big part of what makes downtown special. If you take that away, which we've had to do given the nature of the pandemic, that has an impact that's outside of the economics of an office lease or whatever. That's something special about downtown that is an advantage that we've not had for the past 6 months. So it just says it's going to be important to figure out how to get that element of downtown living and downtown life back as the pandemic hopefully recedes.
I like to look at downtown success really as a chair with 4 legs, right? You've got 4 different parts that are feeding into that. You have your residents, right? A strong residential base. And right now there are less residents partially because of UW. You have your visitors, your tourists, a huge part of the economy, many hotels, restaurants downtown, and that is virtually nil right now. You have your events that are taking place, your farmers markets, your Ironmans, your CrossFits, all of these things really do bring a ton of people to downtown and create a great quality of life and create events. Those aren't around right now. And then as you guys are talking about the commercial spaces, the business people work downtown, they're not there right now. So it is a difficult situation in downtown, but they will all come back. Sort of leads us to the next question for you all. Can you compare and contrast what you were working on in August of 2019 to what you're working on in August of 2020?
Sure, I could start. I mean, we were definitely working on a lot more ground up construction projects, particularly in the commercial space, commercial office. A lot of those projects are well underway, but there's very few in the pipeline kind of going into the following year, into 2021. So again, I think just to kind of reiterate, a lot of companies are kind of in that wait and see. On the workplace strategy side of things, we were working on a lot of things that were really focused around talent engagement, recruitment, retention. So people really taking a look at those office environments of how they can remain competitive and really using that as a recruitment tool. I definitely, again, see more of a pause on that, just more of a wait and see, trying to figure out, the best strategies of, do we follow talent where they're at? Do we bring them back to that core headquarter type office environment? So it's kind of an interesting thing, because at the end of the day, it's still all about talent and then where that best talent, where we can get that best talent for our corporations. So I think workplace strategy in general will come back. I just think it's going to be under a more of an evaluation lens on what does this flexibility mean for our workforce and where do we need them.
For me, it's been a shift from long-term financing and long-term leases to short-term leases, to term financing, bridge loans, and then subletting. Subleases are really starting to come back right now as different companies find they have excess space, but they have a long-term lease that they're committed to. How can they sublet that space, and how can they sublet it to a business that might be collaborative or complementary to their own? And so it's interesting to see larger buildings that had fewer tenants are now likely going to turn into buildings with multi-tenants or multiple tenants, and whether or not those tenants are mixed together or chosen because of their complementary nature. I think you're going to see more of that in the office context, where before that's always been a big deal in retail and not so much in office. But it seems like that's some of the stuff I'm starting to see now.
Yeah, I think echoing Heather's points, everything a year ago seemed to be forward-looking and aspirational, and what's the next step going to be, and what big plans, great plans can we come up with. A year later, here we are, we're in much more of a protective, reactive mode. There's so much more uncertainty in the market generally, whether that's office space or otherwise. And so, back to that point we made initially, folks are really considering what commitments are still worth making and what commitments aren't. I think in terms of traction in the market, the things that were on pace and already kind of in the pipeline and going have seemed to continue. Maybe they slowed down a little bit, but we haven't seen a lot of things in our world that have completely ended or been put on the shelf for an indeterminate period of time. But those things that were already wavering, those sort of like, okay, we only have a limited bandwidth to pay attention to the effects of COVID and what that means for our employees and what our office rents are going to be, and people working from home and implementing that. We don't have time and attention and focus and energy to focus on peripheral things that maybe aren't quite as important. So there's been a little bit of a retrenching in that mindset of what are we good at, what are we focused on, and how do we take that attention we were paying and having dispersed all over the place, how can we bring it back and make sure that we get the absolute best out of the biggest priorities for us.
One quick follow-up, I think, mainly to Heather as well, maybe, and people like Nathan that are working in the development. You might see in the architecture and the engineering fields that the projects maybe are not coming through as they were in development. Right? The projects that were already, as Ben mentioned, part of the ecosystem are already taking place. They're constructing. What are you seeing in sort of the future, 2, 3, 4 years out in development with the projects you're starting to work on?
Yeah, I mean, it tends to flow kind of that big picture strategy model. I think companies kind of getting their arms around what does that future business objective look like? Does it need to pivot at all? And then, in terms of specific market sectors, I mean, I don't see necessarily one completely rising over the other. I mean, industrial for us has been really strong through this and really hasn't let up through the entire shutdown. But I would say every other industry that we deal with has been impacted pretty heavily. Our public work seems to be continuing pretty strong as well, if that answers your question. Okay.
Nathan, sorry, please.
Yeah, from our perspective, industrial is going gangbusters yet. In the downtown environment, in 2019 in August, you were starting to see some developers actually considering more speculative office development. You're not seeing that now. The office development that I've been seeing have been large single tenant users looking to build their own building and then might have excess space as well. Same with corporate expansions that I've been seeing have been the businesses that are doing really well in this environment. And you can kind of identify those that have been deemed essential businesses and have been just as busy versus those that have been really hit hard. Those that have been doing well are continuing with plans, but the speculation is kind of put on pause right now.
That may have answered the next question we had put forward to you guys, but how might real estate deals evolve to attract tenants downtown post-COVID-19?
Yeah, I think the retail front is going to be what's most interesting to see evolve. Fiore has retail investments, office investments, and also industrial, similar to what Nathan and Heather were saying. Our industrial properties have continued to do well. There's not been a blip. There's been continued demand. We're just under contract again today to sell one in the market, and there's been continued interest from investors in that space. So, maybe 100 years ago, downtowns involved a lot of industrial properties, but no longer. So as we look towards office and retail, on the retail side particularly, we've had to get more creative in how we help our retail tenants, almost as partners, get through some foreseeable future till we can be past the impacts of this pandemic. And the Fed has finally started to come out and say on a national level that we're not going to have a full economic recovery until we solve the public health crisis. That is nowhere more true than in the retail sector. Our mom and pop shops and neighborhood centers and otherwise, they're being supported by the neighborhoods, but restaurants in particular are not going to be able to do the economics that they could do a year ago until you're comfortable going out and sitting down for dinner with friends who you haven't seen in a while and not even thinking about the health risks of doing so. So until we can get to that point, there's going to be a continued need on the retail side for support. And so we've had to get creative about how to do that. On the office side, work from home on such a grand scale is new, but working from home as a concept is not new. There have been people in almost every firm that have been doing it to some degree. And so it's more of a scalability question than it is implementing a new process. Whereas on restaurant sides, a lot of them have had to pivot to carry-out models that weren't even part of their business 3, 4, 5, 6 months ago. So, I think the amount of change, the degree of change is there a little bit different. And then ultimately for us as landlords, I think is going to be a real question, as when office tenants in particular and retail tenants cut their rent checks, what are they paying for? What are they getting for what that rent goes towards? And ultimately, what's that value that we deliver as landlords and building owners? And unless we can continue to prove out that value from day to day and year to year, there's going to be, there's going to be a hesitancy to continue paying premium rents if that's what it takes to be in the downtown area.
Yeah, and Ben, I kind of wonder too if, I think of like the workplace environment and attracting talent in terms of attracting tenants, cleaning protocols and, HVAC, some of the well-being principles of multi-tenanted office buildings. I mean, do you see that as something that might start creeping its way into the lease negotiations?
Yeah, it already has to the point that operationally we've already proactively, I know other landlords in downtown Madison have already proactively made upgrades to their HVAC systems, have upgraded their filters, have upgraded whether it's UV treatments or other treatments to help, ideally kill the virus to the extent it's in the system, make offices in particular a safer place for people to be. Those changes have already started being implemented in downtown. But they only go so far, right? I mean, I'll stand by the CDC's recommendation. One of the most effective things you can do is just put on a mask when you're in the office, right? It's as simple as that. So, or at least one of the biggest impacts you can have is as simple as that. And frankly, we've seen good compliance from our tenants for the most part and wearing masks in the common areas of our buildings. And I talked to other people in parts of the state, and I was just in the Dakotas the past week, and I'll tell you what, we are light years ahead of a lot of other places in downtown Madison when it comes to compliance from wearing masks and being aware of the potential impacts of the virus. So I think that will continue. And frankly, we'll have to see what evolves over the next 6 to 12 months. There's probably technologies that are yet to be rolled out. There's probably operational protocols that tenants are developing right now that they will get around to making mandatory across the multiple offices that we're not yet aware of. But some of it at the end of the day is just mental, right? If your employees don't mentally feel comfortable coming back into the office, it doesn't matter if there's an actual health risk or not. Same way with going out to a restaurant. So that's not something we as landlords can we don't have direct control over. That's where it takes partnering with our tenants, and ultimately employers have to be aware of those issues as well.
One additional comment on that, and Ben alluded to it. One thing the pandemic has really shown is how interconnected everything is, from retail to office to just the environment downtown. And right now, there's definitely a perception in the downtown, whether it be with the George Floyd protests or the pandemic, that it's just not a safe place to be. And with the investment that has gone on in the downtown in the last 20 to 25 years, it's really dependent on organizations like DMI, individuals, companies, to come together to help collaborate to promote and make it a safe place and let people know it's a safe place, whether that's coming into your work or going to frequent one of the businesses that are downtown. But that's a process that we're going to have to all come together over the next few months to do. On the collaboration side that Ben talked about with tenants and landlords and upgrading of HVAC, setting out different layouts within your office so that your employees feel safe. I think there's going to be a lot of best practices that come from that. And unfortunately, I think there will also be some regulation that'll come from that. And to the extent we in downtown Madison and downtown Milwaukee are able to show strides that we're making, we might be unnecessary guidelines and regulations being put out by public health to force improvements that might not be necessary.
Jason, I wanted to just add really quick, the Business Improvement District here in Milwaukee, we have like a downtown dining week, and they had done kind of this rally around different restaurants could offer up these prepackaged menus from a bunch of different restaurants here as companies were bringing employees back. I thought that was just a great way, I think, Nathan, to your point, of really kind of rallying behind our local restaurant business, retail businesses, as those companies come back, and maybe they have a campus, cafeteria that isn't functioning right now. That was a great way to kind of rally around the downtown businesses.
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, the work that the Milwaukee bid does in downtown Milwaukee is fantastic. We work very closely with Beth and the team and Matt Dorner and the team in Milwaukee. We honestly, we use a lot of their ideas and vice versa. Great relationship with them and be able to trade ideas of what's working in the other big city in Wisconsin. I think the question from the last discussion really leads to how are you guys engaging with your employees of your own firms, but also maybe Ben with your tenants on what's their plan for sort of how they're going to work and what their future looks like in the next few months to half a year.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen it in the news, and it's true here locally as well. There were initial timelines for coming back to the office, and now there's farther out timelines for coming back to the office. In part, certainly having the schools being all virtual, at least the public schools all virtual, is going to delay people to returning full-time to the office because whether you think of the schools that way or not, they are childcare to a large degree. And until parents are freed of the teaching responsibilities at home, or at least monitoring the teaching responsibilities at home, they have, it's harder to get back into the office for 8 hours a day in a way that they were prior to the pandemic. There's other distancing protocols. I think some of our tenants are contemplating whether to make physical changes to their space, as Heather was sort of alluding to, with distancing and furniture layouts. Certainly we've heard a lot of talk about moving back to more private offices, and those offices that were the complete open work environments, they've had the most challenges operationally in terms of how they're going to continue to operate. But that said, there's always going to be financial pressures as well. And so where we've seen things kind of settling in is tenants don't really want to force their employees back to the office. They want their employees to come back when they feel comfortable. So to the extent they can continue working from home, that's great. And they'll continue to do that for the time being. And then secondarily, to the extent they can sort of manage the space they have as opposed to creating entirely new space, they're still trying to manage what they have right now, whether it's people coming in at various shifts or off hours or at different times, and trying to manage the operations as opposed to the spaces. And then we'll have to see. I mean, maybe the most interesting thing is, I think the pandemic has really brought to light some sort of pre-existing, I'll call them power dynamics within not just local offices, but local offices versus their national leadership. And particularly firms in Madison that have offices in California or New York or DC or other places where there have been, let's call it, hotter spots for the pandemic. The reaction in those markets has not been on the same timing as here locally, and frankly has been at times, has had to be more stringent in those markets. And then applying those measures locally has been met with some resistance because there isn't the perceived need for it in the same way here. And so those become sort of these intra-firm conflicts that maybe we as landlords weren't aware of, nor should we necessarily be aware of, but they've somewhat landed on us because we need to be involved in the operational solutions for how to address it. So that's been interesting, pull the curtain back a little bit in a way that maybe we didn't see before.
Yeah, I would say, to echo what Ben said about just that phased approach coming back, I think we were starting to look at that a little bit, but it really didn't align really with our culture long term. And so we have a definite more of an organic approach at EUA. I would say that we have it organic, but in a way that every time I come to the office, I'm taking a survey to make sure I'm not showing any signs, that kind of thing. So it basically gives me the green light to come in. We do wear our masks, obviously. And then we had some areas of the office that are kind of off limits, like our kitchenettes and those types of things. But on the social side of thing, I think this is the one thing that, if I could leave any lasting nugget for anybody on this call, it's the culture of the organizations, and something that, particularly if you're leading a company, to really pay attention to. We've implemented Thankful Thursdays on our intranet, where people just, express gratitude, to sketch nights, where even if it's just 10 people getting together to do a quick sketch with one another, a lot more scheduled social kind of activities. And then at our firm-wide company meeting just last week, we all submitted, what we've been doing on this lockdown, from places we've traveled, parks we've gone to the home improvements we've done. And then we had a slideshow, and it prompted one of my colleagues to say, gosh, I really miss you. I'm going to be at the beer garden next Saturday, so would you come and join me at a socially distanced, gathering kind of thing. So I think people are really craving, that social connection that we're not getting through this. So just something to really pay attention to really kind of up some of that schedule some social things together.
Okay, no answer from Nathan, I guess. You don't want to chime in there. You were going to, I don't know. You look like you're about to. Do you have anything to add?
Sure. This is on the engaging employees. What we've seen anecdotally is it's really based on the individual. And for every employee that we have who's really enjoyed being able to work at home and work remotely, we have another employee that's really been fatigued by it and can't wait to get back into the office. And so it's finding a way to manage each person's preference, but also their situation at home. To Heather's point, the forced isolation that we've experienced over the last few months has really shown me just how social we are and how much we want to interact and be with people. And so it's figuring out ways to do that. And part of this has created a lot of data at both our own firm as well as clients that I've talked to in regards to what type of job is actually efficient and productive at home, and what operational efficiencies have been identified with people not working in the office. And so you've really started to segment from an administrative level your employees in 3 different buckets. One bucket is you could work virtually forever and you might even be more productive. Another bucket is a hybrid approach where some things can be done virtually, but some things need to be in the office. And then the third is this job has really been inefficient, non-productive from the virtual capacity. And the only way this job exists going forward is if we find a way to get it back into the office. And it's marrying those 3 buckets and then redeveloping your space to take advantage of the, positives of those interactions that need to be in person versus the ones that are going to be virtual, and how do you get them all together. And part of our discussions as well has been the people to work versus work to people. So those particular employees and jobs that have worked very well virtually, that's an opportunity for us to seek talent that's more geographically diverse, that doesn't have to come into the office. And so to the extent we can identify those positions, we now have a larger talent pool that we weren't looking at before because they don't have to be located where our home offices are. And vice versa, those jobs that need to be in the office, those are ones that are going to be really focused on local hires. So just a few thoughts.
A quick question before we get to our audience questions. Remember, send your audience questions in through the chat, or you can raise your hand, either one, and we can let you in. How does this all impact downtowns? I think one of the reasons why we're here today, right? Milwaukee's downtown with Heather and Ben and Nathan based here in Milwaukee. What do downtowns look like over the next year, we'll say? How does this all affect that power of amalgamation that is a downtown?
Oh, that's a loaded question, Jason. I mean, it
does come from me, right? So I do run a downtown organization.
I know. I'm like, but it's a true ecosystem, and without that, steady employee base, let's just say from the businesses downtown, I think the restaurants and the retail, they kind of struggle. That core group isn't there, and so are the offices? I keep getting this question: are offices going away? I don't think they're going away. I think when it's safe for us to return back, I think a lot of businesses will kind of take a look at this period of time. Nathan, you said it great with, this is the test right now. This is the pilot test that we can all see what works, what doesn't work. I do think that there's going to be kind of this comeback, this pent up demand. People want to be in the downtown, in that energy. I feel it every time I come into downtown Milwaukee, or even, you know, visit our Madison office. It's just a different energy. So I'm bullish on it. It's going to get back. It has to. We can't live like this forever.
Well, from my viewpoint, I think that's the right answer. Ben and Nathan, do you have the right answer?
Most definitely not, but I'll offer one anyway. So, you know, one of the questions you asked us ahead of the panel, are there going to be any positives to come out all of this? We focused on a lot of the challenges so far and limitations, and we're all kind of stuck at home, forced isolation. But, you know, I'll point to one tangible example in downtown Madison. I think the Streetery program, the outdoor dining for restaurants, the fact that the city finally, I'll say, gave in and decided they had no other choice but to answer the call for more outdoor seating that, frankly, people have been making for years. It's been well received. It's been very popular. It's frankly brought people back to State Street in particular at a time when nobody was really coming down here on account of the protests. And I think it's helped our restaurants and retail. And I think that's something that we can look at as a positive, where it's pushed the envelope in terms of what we can do, what we can support, and that people enjoy. So for the time being, I hope things like that, we can continue to think and push the boundaries a little bit as to maybe what may take a little more effort to implement, but ultimately is what people want. And then beyond that, you know, long term, I agree with Heather. I think downtowns are going to continue to be the focal point of energy in the city. I will say, I think as it relates to, you know, my comments earlier about landlords justifying the value for the premium rents that you're charged to be downtown, part of that is going to be making sure that, you know, that energy that is inherent in the downtown, that you harness some of that in your workspace downtown. And maybe it means a smaller footprint and people coming in from time to time. Maybe it means making a bigger commitment and consolidating from other locations. I think that'll vary from firm to firm. But I've told a lot of our tenants so far, you know, despite what's going on with protests and COVID and whatever, the focus is still on downtown. The impact and the life of kind of what's going on in Madison is still happening downtown, and there's a reason. So I think that will always be inherent, and I think that will always be a reason for people to locate here, whether it's for entertainment or for professional.
I have one other just quick comment on downtown and just the relationship component of it. There's this quote from the Yahoo CEO, Marissa Mayer, and I think this was after they brought their employees back to the workplace after doing kind of a pilot test of everybody work from home. And she said, people are more productive when they're alone, but they're more collaborative and innovative when they're together. Some of the best ideas come from pulling two different ideas together. So I think about that in terms of a downtown environment, networking functions, walking down the street when it's a busy, you know, cafe and you bump into somebody and, oh my gosh, we got to get that meeting on the calendar. Those like relationship building opportunities where we're just out and about, those have to come back. That this is very transactional, where sure, we probably have networks built, we have trust with one another where we can pick up the phone, but what about those that we don't know yet? I think there's a real dynamic that the downtowns play in helping that relationship building businesses continue to thrive. It's a piece of the overall puzzle. Maybe it's a part of the four-legged stool. I don't know, but just some thoughts on relationships in general.
My prediction, I think you'll have short-term contraction, but long-term, I think downtowns are still going to be as vibrant as ever. And what I think is going to happen is that they're going to get younger. I think the younger demographics are less concerned about the pandemic, other type of protests or crime that's happening. Not one and the same, but two different items that are out there in the news media, and I think younger people are less concerned about it. And then there was 2 or 3 weeks ago, I had seen a study, it's either by Seville or McKinsey Company, that was talking about the importance of having an office work environment, like actually being in the office versus being virtual. And the demographic that had ranked that as most important was the 20s demographic. So I think it's younger people that are really seeing the positive, of being collaborative, being social, and that's going to drive our downtowns like I think it always really drives the downtown. But if any exodus is occurring right now, I think it's in older demographics, not younger ones.
Yeah, Nathan, that actually came up a little bit in the Wall Street Journal. I don't know if you saw the article on companies starting to rethink remote work, and that younger demographic, the younger professional, just not getting up to speed as quickly because of, you know, the onboarding, for instance, tough right now in this environment. So I think definitely there'll be more of a demand from that younger generation.
Heather, I think that's a great point. I had a conversation with a very senior executive today, and they were having a very hard time training their youngest members right out of college, because so much of that happens through osmosis in the conversations and sneaking into somebody's office and saying, oh, where's this file, or how do I do that? That sort of informal education, I think, is really, really important. But I also want to say the power of Ancora, the power of coffee shops, because that stuff does matter. I mean, I do it, as you know, I do it, all you know. I think I've run into every single person on this call at Ancora and how much business it is. It's Jeff Tubbs and I saying hey to each other and running into each other, or, you know, me and Bill Connor. It's like, what happened with this? What happened with that? So much work can happen so quickly in these environments. So we're going to move to questions from our audience. First question is, what will the impacts be if we remain in the status quo with COVID into next year, i.e. no students, no UW students, no UW football games, you know, minimal government employees, minimal tourists? Is there a tipping point where there's just, that happens for too long? It has real economic damage.
Yeah, it has real impact economically. I will just share, you know, I think maybe a good kind of rule of thumb for how restaurants are doing right now. It seems like the mean is somewhere around about 50% of sales of what they were doing a year ago. And particularly in the downtown, that's been fairly consistent. And I know, talking to one restaurateur I'm close with, he was saying any restaurant he has that has exposure to office, whether it's downtown or suburbs or wherever, his sales are way off, right? Just because people aren't in the office. So there will continue to be pressure on those businesses that just rely on a sort of critical mass of people. And that's amplified, but not just by the office piece, but by the fact, as I mentioned earlier, you know, there's no events in Monona Terrace, there's no conferences, the university, football weekends, the whole thing. So, you know, optimistically, I don't think we'll be in this situation forever, but next 6 to 12 months is not out of the realm of possibility, certainly.
Next question for anyone on the panel is, this last spring, Gensler did a survey of its clients and their employees where 30% surveyed indicated post-COVID they want to work from home 3 or more days per week. Cushman and Wakefield learned this spring that 73% want some flexible work from home model. If any of these macro trends take hold in even a small way, what do you predict the impact will be on the downtown office market?
I think I kind of hit on this a little bit before, but I still think that there's going to be a core office component to any organization. And Gallup did a survey too, and I want to say it was around 47% pre-COVID already had some flexible work nature that they were dealing with, but that they were involved in. And I think during the shutdown, Gallup did a similar survey. It was around 59%, you know, said, hey, post-COVID, I'd still like to work like these flexible working arrangements. That has trended lower and lower. I think that in terms of the downtown market, I think because there will always be some form of core where people will come back to an office, that will start to thrive again. You know, I think to businesses in general, and the relationships and the interconnectedness between employees, that trust building, that camaraderie, you know, how you connect with one another to really innovate, that is core to an office, to being together one-on-one. And I think businesses, again, that Wall Street Journal article that I read last week, I mean, they were starting to hit on that and scratch the surface of some of the challenges and barriers. So I think some of those employees will come back, and again, I'm positive about our downtown. So
it'll be interesting to see how the square footage is impacted. But some of it is going to be identifying those organizational priorities in person with each other. and you might see some spaces getting converted into more collaborative spaces. So when people are in the office, they're able to use those together. To the extent there's individual offices, might be back to the single office as opposed to the large cubicle open areas, and how that redesign impacts square footage. I don't know. I don't know if it needs more or less, or if it can just be reconfigured, but that's all stuff that's going to be figured out. And partly on the last question on economics, I think there's already been a huge negative in economic swing, as all the statistics have shown. My, I guess, dismal prediction is the next 6 to 9 months are not going to be pretty. And as companies are identifying those operational inefficiencies that I noted before from the virtual stuff, you'll probably see more layoffs in the next 6 to 9 months. And then hopefully there'll be a light at the end of the tunnel on how we're going to come out of this and get back to a new normal.
It's interesting that Nathan mentioned the term the new normal, because I'm sure all of us have heard it quite a bit. I'm a fundamental believer that the new normal will not be the same as the old normal. And to Nathan's point, it's not clear yet what that's going to look like, but simply to go back to what we were doing before and call that success is not going to be enough, right? So I think companies are going to have to accommodate those 73% of workers who want some ability to work from home. But as I alluded to earlier, I mean, different companies have been dealing with this for a different amount of time, but the concept of working from home is not in and of itself a new concept. It's just a question of the level of scale to which it's implemented. And to me, I think to Nathan's point as well, it'll have some short-term impacts. Maybe there'll be some contractions in square footage. But what it says to me is, if you're a company and you're still going to have an office, which I think is absolutely inevitable to some degree, the question is going to be, okay, how do I get the most value out of that? And part of that value is going to be, where do I want that to be located to help generate the value? I think a useful example to look at is actually on campus. If you look at the business school, for example, they've been in their building since the mid-90s. You know, it was built a lot of private offices for professors. It was built with a big business school library. Just last year, a couple of years ago, they converted the library into shared collaboration space for students to work on group projects and do other sort of mingling in a way that wasn't possible in other spaces. So to the extent that, you know, we're going to evolve going forward, concepts like that are not out of the question. Right now, really the only thing holding us back is just a continued health risk. And if you assume that's going to dissipate over time, or we'll find a way to deal with it, whether it completely goes away or not, then we'll have used this time and had different experiences that will you know, influence how we shape our spaces in the future. Maybe it'll be the same square footage, maybe it won't, but I guarantee you we'll be doing different things with that square footage than we're doing today.
Yeah, an interesting follow-up to that question actually is on the development side, and I'll read the question. I have a question for the panel. I was talking to a developer client of mine regarding what he is seeing in the market. His comments were pretty consistent with today's conversation. And the one response I found interesting related to the office space is that he is seeing that there may be a higher demand for space since some of his clients are commenting that they need more space to social distance with their staff. I was wondering if the panel might comment on this, particularly from the development side.
I was looking at the development side of the panel. But I could comment, it's, are we going to need more square footage is basically the question. And I think it's really too soon to tell. It's even too soon to tell if it's a private office or an open work environment, quite frankly. And I think businesses really just have to be thoughtful about what is our long-term business objectives? How do our people work? How do they move the ball forward with how they work? And then organize the office environment around that to best support it. So sorry, I'm not answering the yes or no, black or white. It's right down the middle there for me.
I think especially in the short term, I think the continued cost pressures, I mean, we've seen it over the past 4 or 5 years in particular. A lot of the drive towards open office spaces has just been to reduce the amount of square footage per employee in the office, right? So we've gone from law firms that were upwards of 400 or 500 or 600 square foot per person, or in these tech open environment offices are under 200 square foot of an employee, and in some cases approaching 100 square feet per employee. That if we're all the way down at the lower end of that spectrum is in a dense environment, certainly I could see us taking more square footage, but the cost pressures are always going to be there. And unless you can justify it from the perspective of getting value out of it by creating newer, better space, it's going to be hard for companies to just pay for extra space. I think that's always been the case. I think it'll continue to be.
And I love the way you put that, Ben, of, you know, creating value out of it. And that's why it's so important, I think, during this pilot test of work from home, and Nathan, you alluded to this, of how are people working and what are their barriers? And if we need to create a different office environment to help support and get rid of those barriers, then let's do it. Or if it's promoting more work from home, that might be a strategy as well. So it's all about the value.
Nathan? Okay. I can't read Nathan at all, whether or not he wants to talk or not.
My screen keeps freezing.
Oh, no wonder, because I'm like, he is play poker for a living, because I cannot read your face at all. Okay, because of that, I'm going to ask probably the most difficult question I've seen coming through in a chat in a long time. So I'm going to ask it to Nathan. How do we get the politics out of COVID? It's a big question.
Out of COVID?
Out of the COVID discussion.
I guess I would say we're going to have to ignore the politics, and it's going to be a process of communication and collaboration, kind of what we've been talking about. On things that appear to be successful right now are when individuals within companies and companies to companies and their consultants, people that are working for them, are communicating on what they're seeing and trying to come up with solutions together for it. I don't think we're going to be able to rely on the politicians at any level, whether it's local, state, or federal, to be able to come to some consensus given how polarized that whole environment is. And so it's really incumbent on us, private, nonprofit, non-governmental sectors, and those governmental departments that we can work with in order to get things approved that make sense, that help us all function in today's society, is probably the way that we're going to move forward. But to Ben's point, things like wearing a mask shouldn't be politicized. People see as only having upside, no real downside. So let's do it and try to get to the other side of the pandemic as quickly as possible and hope the science comes up with a vaccine or whatever the answer is. But so no real answer on how to get the politics out of it, other than to, I guess, cut the politics portion out of our answers that we're going to try to come to together.
Very good political answer, Nathan. Good job. All right, we're going to, as I always try to do, Mr. Half Glass Full. I mean, annoyingly to many of you, I know Craig Stanley finds me excessively annoying with my positivity, but what are the positives coming out of this time? What are the positives that you all are seeing coming out of the COVID-19 experience?
Ben, I think you mentioned, you know, kind of the different office locations, and I think there's been definitely a heightened connectivity between all of our offices. Not that we weren't connected before, but, you know, having a home office versus a Denver office and Madison office, we're just collaborating so much more on this in like rapid fire, it feels like. Had some really just great through these social events that we've been hosting. Just again, we would probably socialize maybe more here in Milwaukee, and now being able to have kind of a sketch night with our peers in Denver, it's just been really fun. On the personal side, like I didn't really venture out to many of the parks before. I mean, I kind of stuck to my favorite couple of parks, but have found some amazing parks with my kiddos. So that's a silver lining for me. So getting out there and hiking a bit.
Yeah, I would suggest on a personal level, I'm hoping everybody has been able to find some sort of positive impact just by the forced nature of being hunkered at home and having to do something with the time you have on your hands. As a group, though, I think the biggest opportunity, and I think this gets to Nathan's answer about the politics, and if we can get him out, this is a shared experience on a scale I'm not sure I've experienced in my professional life. I don't know if I'll experience again in my professional life, where all of us to some degree are in the same boat together, in the sense that we have a challenge in front of us that we're all trying to address, that's impacting us in somehow, on some level in a very similar way, right? And so there's just a shared experience there that in some ways I almost feel bad for the kids who are going to college this year when they graduate in 4 years and they enter the workforce. And hopefully by that point we're past the pandemic. And there's going to probably be a divide between those employees who have lived through this experience and managed through it and worked from home and dealt with wearing the mask on a regular basis and other changes in a way that those employees coming into the office won't have experienced, right? And so to the extent that we're all going through it right now, there's a shared experience there that hopefully will bind us together more closely going forward. So, or at least it has the opportunity to. I guess it's incumbent upon us to see if it does or not.
Yeah, I'm going to modify my answer a little bit based on what Ben just said and piggyback on that. I think in thinking about it now, the biggest thing that I see as a positive through all this is just a reemergence of empathy and people seeing how difficult everything has been for themselves, but also their family, their individuals that they come into contact each day, and your fellow employees. And if anything, even though I've been virtual and isolated from people I work with, I've learned a lot more about their personal lives and the things that they're going through. And I think that's only going to help our team at Reinhardt be stronger and help me be a better friend to the people that I've spoken to and talked to through all this. And so that shared experience that Ben's talking about, I hope that we all build on that and take some of that empathy forward when we're all back interacting in person and things are moving so much faster than they currently move right now.
Well, that is a great way to end this meetup, talking about downtown and commercial real estate. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you to Heather Turner-Loth, our great panelists from EUA, Ben Schmidt from Fiore Companies, and Nathan Wadier from Reinhardt. Thank you all for your insight. We really appreciate it. Most importantly, thank you to everyone for joining us on this call. Thought it was fantastic. It is recorded, so you can get it out to your friends. We'll have it on our YouTube channel in the next 24 hours. But again, thank you all for joining us. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day, and most importantly, hope everyone stays healthy. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jason.